Welcome to the U.S. Constitution Unit. This is my favorite unit that we will cover this year, so get excited. Today, we're going to be looking at what government we used prior to the Constitution and then why we got rid of that in order to get the Constitution. So, we have just come out of the American Revolutionary War. We have just signed our peace with Great Britain, and we need to establish a government that's going to be able to function and hopefully maintain order and all of those things that government does. So, we start off with the Articles of Confederation. So, the Articles of Confederation, first attempt at self-government, established a very, very weak federal government. And I want you to think about why our founders may have wanted a weak central government to start off with. So there were some strengths and some weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. The weaknesses, though, basically, the federal government had no power to tax. That's a big one. You might want to put a star by that one. Federal government had no power to tax. There was no clear executive leader. So there was nobody who was clearly like in charge. And there was also no judicial branch. There was no federal branch that would be able to interpret and apply laws. There were some good things that came from the Articles of Confederation. The Articles were able to establish a peace with Great Britain. So that was one big accomplishment of it. They helped us, or we signed the peace treaty with Great Britain under the Articles of Confederation. That's a good thing. The Articles also provided the ability for the federal government to expand in two different ways. We have the Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So those were two things that allowed the federal government to expand, allowed the country to expand and become closer to what we would recognize as the United States today. So there's lots of different things that are going on in the government under the Articles of Confederation. People aren't real happy. And we have a group of Revolutionary War soldiers in Massachusetts, and they have been promised a pension. Okay, their pension is their retirement. So they, after you retire from your military service, and you get this money from the government. Well, they'd been promised this pension and promised this pension and promised this pension, but they hadn't ever received it. So if you are expecting a payment for something, you're probably going to be using that payment to do things, like pay your bills. So these Revolutionary War soldiers, these veterans, didn't get their money. They were mad. They started to have their property seized. Their debts were coming due and they couldn't pay it. So during what's called Shays Rebellion, this guy named Daniel Shays leads a group of Revolutionary War veterans and basically storms the town in Massachusetts. They break into federal buildings, state buildings. They break into like courthouses and they disrupt trials. And it's just not really a good situation. And it all comes to a head when the group, the mob, was able to take control of the federal arsenal, which is where all of the weapons were stored for the federal government. Okay. And there was no ability that the government had to call up any troops because they couldn't form a military or anything like that. So the person that actually put down the rebellion was a wealthy Boston merchant and a militia that he owned. So the federal government couldn't even protect the people. They couldn't even protect the country, okay? So that was one of the things that eventually led to the drafting of the Constitution. Next, we have the Annapolis Convention. So in addition to the federal government not being able to draft a military, they're not able to, really do a whole lot of anything. They also have no power to control currency. Okay, so each of the states were allowed to function as their own mini countries, basically. So one of the things that each state had was their own currency. So if you were trying to trade between Georgia and New York, you may have to exchange currencies, or the currency that you have might be worth something different in that state. So in Annapolis, Maryland, in the summer of 1786, a whole bunch of people from each of the colonies met to discuss issues of interstate commerce, or commerce going between the states. The discussions eventually turned into maybe our federal constitution might need to be changed. Maybe we might need to increase power of the federal government. And they agreed to meet the following summer in Philadelphia to discuss that. And I'll stop there. If you guys have any questions, let me know.